And the topic here is going to be rationalizing data investments. Let me give you a little bit of background on the topic here. The more data you use, the more you find you're going to need. This leads to hard decisions when it comes to what investments you make in data projects, technology, personnel, with, as always, a limited budget. So cybersecurity teams need processes and tools to be able to measure ROI, manage data sprawl, and what are some of the best ways that you can think about optimizing your existing and upcoming data investments, and how have others approached that issue? That's what we're here to talk about today in this next panel. So I want to welcome up to the stage first, Randy Larrier, Practice Director, Big Data and Analytics with Optiv. Randy, come on up here, please. We have fabulous prizes for you. Randy, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And we are joined by Bruce Phillips, SVP and Chief Information Security Officer with West, and he has got the best guitar collection in the room. Bruce. Thank you so much, sir. Also joining us is Ted Kiefer, CISO with AZEC. Ted, I got you just when you got your microphone on. How was the timing there? Welcome.
Perfect.
Let's talk about rationalizing data investments. Gentlemen, it has been 2 years since we've been able to sit in a situation like this with people and be able to talk about such things. A few things have changed in that time. How would you say 2 years have digital transformation? What have they meant for data and for the urgency to secure it? Jump in.
So there's a ton of data, and a lot more data, and it's going like this, right? With devices, with the remote work, zero trust, every organization that made plans to consume a certain amount of data probably has seen those plans blown through. And so just the more data there is, the harder it is per piece of data to get the value out. And so a lot of organizations have been struggling to rationalize. Do we spend more on data tooling? Do we hire more data people? Do we just let some things go? And coming up with those strategies are sometimes some of the biggest challenges we see with our clients.
By the way, it's yes, 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 correct?
Yeah, right. And do it for half the cost you did last year.
There you go. Gentlemen, how about it? What's it meant for data and the urgency to secure it?
Data has blown up not only in the amount of data that we've had, but where it is now living. Because we had to move things around so people could have access to that data. And that's the exact opposite that you really want to do. You don't want to have multiple copies of data all over the place that you're losing track of. And you need to be able to rein that in. And I think that's really the challenge now, is figuring out all the decisions that you made at the beginning of this wonderful period in our lives that were to keep the business running and keep us solvent. And now we're going to go, okay, we made all of these decisions. What do I do now? And how do I recover from that? And how can I recover from that with no additional budget, because the first thing wasn't planned. Now this isn't planned. Yeah. By the way, we want more data.
Yeah, I'd say in addition to that, I think the challenge, so the challenge in information security is we've got one of the many challenges. We've got a lot of resource constraints, right? It's hard to hire people. Well, IT is having the same problem, and as IT is having the same problem, they're not able to answer the business need. And so what I think the other thing that I'm seeing a lot of is because of that, then IT is not satisfying the business, and the business then goes outside to a third party. So now I've got data propagating in third-party contracts where, like, I don't even have my IT partner engaged in a way where I can then come in and engage as a security professional. And so that, especially over the last 2 years, has gotten really bad.
So you all have the opportunity to explain this to senior leaders and often to the board now. And you're more adept than ever at being able to make the case. Why is it so hard to rationalize investment in data?
So we're missing a couple tools. Boards and the executives think in terms of balance sheet, cash flow, income statement. There's not a good methodology to properly value your data. There's some carve-outs, but the concept of data as an asset sounds great, but when you translate it to the board, how do you actually put that in dollars and cents? And a lot of data leaders and organizations are focused on metrics that talk about operational stats and different things. Laying out the value case for data, putting it into language that the board can understand. They don't need to be a cyber expert. They don't need to be an IT and a data expert. That is the trick. And it's important to convey that the data is, in fact, an asset. The value that it delivers is so key that it justifies certain investments to be able to go and do the things we want to do.
I think one way to look at it is data has value. And most of the business line owners understand that data has value. And they're realizing that the more data they have, the more they can mine that data, there are more opportunities that they can get out of that. So if you're going to go talk to the board about rationalizing spend for data, as a CISO, I'm not going to have that conversation on my own.
Right.
I'm going to have that conversation with that business owner that says, you know, I can make another $10 million this year only if, well then, okay, you and I will go talk to the board, and you can make that argument and you can say the return on investment. My argument's going to be slightly different. One, I can use data to tell if someone's attacking me, but I need a lot of data and I need tools to mine that data. Then I'm going to put on my other hat, and that's the privacy hat. But there's dragons in all this data. That if you think that deduplication is something that's really good, there's a lot of studies where people have taken deduplicated data and been able to find somebody's house. So it doesn't really exist. So there are dragons in the data. So it's a combination of things that you have to have a conversation with. It is, what is the potential return on the investment of collating, mining this data? What's the risk of having it? But more importantly, what is the bigger risk of losing control of where that data is? Because if you allow your business owners to bypass IT because IT is overworked and underfunded, and they're going to go and start their own data lake somewhere in the cloud because somebody said it was a good idea, that is the biggest risk you have to the organization, because you have no idea where the data is at and how it's being used. And privacy legislations now are such that that's the number one answer you have to have. What are you doing with that data?
If somebody hasn't tweeted this yet, would someone catch that there's dragons in that data? I think that's the most memorable line of the day so far. I like that. That should be a T-shirt. Ted, you get to follow up on that.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I think the challenge that we've got to articulate, how valuable data is and how we need to be making investments in whatever those are, either collecting it so we can use it from a security perspective, collecting it so that it can be used for business, et cetera. The good news there, at least at least when it's not purely an information security or privacy need, is that the business has the same problem, right? They have to figure out how do they justify the cost of whatever they're going to invest in as well. Unfortunately, like I found a lot of my business partners end up not realizing that, and they instead look towards, oh, there's this interesting solution we can get, and they don't understand all the steps in the process, and that really comes into play then when they're kind of contracting an outside service agency to provide that. But it still remains that they still have to figure out how to justify those costs to begin with. So as long as you're in there with them, building a good network with your business partners, talking to them on a regular basis, helping them understand kind of what the risks to their environment are, then when they need to go and justify spend, you're there right along with them. And it's a much easier conversation to have then. That being said, I do think that there still is a challenge when we're trying to justify things that are pure information security spend. I do think it's a little bit easier now when you're talking about data that feeds your SIEM. So that's a little, boards kind of start to get that now, like, oh, yeah, like we don't have an easy way to show how having a SIEM drives bottom line, but we get it. We need it. Okay, you can have some money to do that. Now, granted, it's never as much as we'd really like, but they at least get that you need that. But then when we're talking about, I'd like to bring in some interesting AI to do behavioral analysis on activity across my network. Oh, what's the bottom line on that, right? So those things I think are still a challenge to figure out how to justify.
There's a way to do that. What you want to do is find creative ways to use the data. So when I go talk to the board about user and entity behavior analytics, I don't talk about finding the bad data. Saying, in every organization, we have somebody who is the top salesperson. Why? Are they using tools and techniques that no one else is doing? We could find that with user and entity behavior analytics, and we can teach the other salespeople to do the same thing. Now we can increase revenue. That's how you spin that story. You really want it for finding the bad things. You want to find for anomalies. But you can find anomalies that are good for the business. And if you can find that, the sell is much easier than just saying, I think there are people doing bad things.
Absolutely.
So you just got to sort of think a little bit outside the box and think about how I can use this for the business. Then I get my benefit out of it.
That's well said. Jim, I want to go through some of the stages of rationalizing data investment. I guess it would be anger, acceptance, denial, different things. Ted, why don't you start? And that way Bruce and Randy can say, yeah, what he said. And start here. What are the questions you need to ask up front about data in your enterprise? And I hear a lot of people talking about just data inventory these days.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the easy ones are just, what is it? What exactly is in your data, whether it's structured data, unstructured data. Figuring out, then secondly, how are you using it, right? I mean, and then the third question that I always ask is, well, why, right? I get what you've got. I get how you think you're using it, like why. And I think fortunately here in the last, I mean, just really since privacy laws and privacy concerns have gotten bigger, the business is used to answering that question a lot more, which is, it used to be, well, I'm collecting everything just because I can, right? The users are giving me all this data, or customers are giving me all this data, and so now it's a little easier to have that third conversation around why are you actually collecting this stuff? Is there a legitimate business process or need somewhere in your operation that actually requires that data? That being said, I still struggle with marketing because they just want it all and are going to go crazy with trying to figure out segmentation and how to approach customers and that kind of thing. So they still want everything, but at least for most of the business, they get it, and so having those questions answered is a little bit easier.
I like the minute you said that, my marketing VP walked into the room. Gentlemen, the same for you. What are the questions you need to ask up front?
Those are basically the questions. I always add, the number one thing I want to know is, where is the data? I can't protect it if I don't know where it is. Mm-hmm. The other thing I say is, where did it come from? Did it come from a business partner? Did it come from the consumer? Because if it comes from the consumer, I have different requirements than if it came from a business partner. And then, what are you doing with that data? That's the number one thing. Are you sharing that data with anyone else? And that's sort of the things I would add. Are you sharing it, and where did it come from? Because where it came from has more of an impact on what I can do with that data.
Mm-hmm. And I just add, on top of all these things, a data inventory, metadata, lineage, all these things are important artifacts, but you need the process and the people who are owners and stewards of this data. You need to connect that, all of these questions. How do you tell that story? How do you connect the business value and the uses of the data to all this great one-time exercises to collect it? So I think a lot of times you'll go through the exercise of building your data inventory, and if it doesn't get used, it's just a spreadsheet or it's just a system.
I don't think it's a one-time exercise. It can't be.
It has to be a refreshing process.
You wait a month, and something has changed that you don't know about. So if you're not redoing your data inventory at least once a year, you have no idea where your data is now. Quarterly is probably better. It depends on the size of your organization and what you can actually accomplish over time with your staff. But it's almost like everything else we do. There's nothing that we do that has a finite end. We never do anything that we come to completion and go, ha, look at that, look, I did that. No, it's already out of date, you got to do it again.
Yeah, so the rationalization of your data investment is more investment, unfortunately. But investment in people and process and controls, as well as thinking about then what are the skill sets, the capabilities that enable these functionality. Like back to the point, if you can use a particular set of tools for cyber detection, you can also use it for marketing. Do you need to spend twice on the same license in 2 places? And then if you can rationalize that investment, yeah, you're going to spend more on the process and people, but maybe you save it on the back end by not paying for the same thing twice or not hiring different sets of skill sets with different capability groups. How do you bridge that gap so that you have a holistic enterprise-wide data strategy? And that's how you get out of the jam.
And if you can do that, then you actually have a return on investment because there's revenue that can be tied to it.
Yep.
Security
Follow up.
tools, there's no ROI. And I work for an insurance company. You would think insurance people understand insurance. They don't understand insurance. They just want to know what's the revenue attached to that. The revenue is if you have a claim, you're going to have some return there, but there is no revenue to it.
So follow-up question, Randy, how do you build a business case?
So you need to understand your audience. You need to speak to the language of the deciders, what the most important thing, if it's revenue, if a lot of data organizations are under the risk organization, right? You need to rationalize how the activities and investments you're going to make are going to move the metrics that matter to those people. And to your point, sometimes it's not always revenue. Maybe it's rationalization of risk or ability to move from a 3 to a 4 on a not arbitrary, but different metrics, different frameworks, right? But you have to contextualize what you're proposing and show the clear map of invest in these people, process, technology, move this metric forward, and then ultimately those metrics should be set that get to your ROI and shareholder equity and all that stuff.
Gentlemen, agree? How do you make the case?
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most challenging things for me is that at the end of the day, the people that you're talking to say, like, I want you to invest in this thing that I want to do, they're still people, right? And depending on their background, their personality, they're going to react differently. And so I think if you're a leader in the information security space, you have to spend a lot of time connecting with those leaders before you ever go ask to figure out what is it that or how do they like to receive information. Because like in my experience, some of the board members, my CEO, et cetera, in some cases, they're okay with just receiving literally a PowerPoint with some strategic benefit bullets. And like, this is great. Go check with the CFO, make sure he's okay with the numbers, but we're good to go. And then others, they come from a accounting background and they want to see extremely detailed ROIs. And so, like, if I take that ROI to strategic-minded CEO, he's going to say, "What is this? I'm not going to approve this. I don't want to read this." And so there's a lot of hard work. I mean, you have to do your due diligence and make sure you do the work so that you understand the underlying numbers, but then figure out how to translate that to the audience that you're going to go speak to.
So we're actually marketing people.
Yeah, it's true.
Exactly, yeah.
25% of my job is marketing.
Exactly, yeah.
But they say we have met the enemy and it is us.
It is, exactly, it is. Yeah.
I mean, it's just as I wouldn't, expect to be fluent in finance. I wouldn't be fluent in the operations and the sales. Like the burden's on us and on leaders within these organizations to make the information presentable in a format that can be received. And ultimately, if that's not done, you're just in for a world of pain.
But Bruce, I think you raised a point earlier as well. You find champions to help make your case.
Yes.
Yep.
How do you do that?
If you're not out talking to your peers in the business, start talking to your peers in the business. Find out what they are trying to accomplish. Find out the challenges that they have, and then find ways that you can help them. Mm-hmm. Once you do that, now when you come in and you have something, they're more likely to help you. And you may find out that the things that they're trying to accomplish really fit right into what you want to do. But it's literally going out, marketing your program to your peers, and finding out how you can help them.
What's your experience been with organizations finding that champion to help them make the case?
It's critical. I mean, so everybody likes interesting looking dashboards, fun demos, and cupcakes. right? So back in person, if you can, get people together and show and tell, right? I mean, organizations are doing incredible things with data, right? Are doing incredible things on monitoring and controlling risk. Most parts of the business may not even see it firsthand. So just breaking the ice, having that kind of a touch point. Behind it, you got to do structure, right? You got to think about, who are the key decision makers, who are the different business unit leads. You got to plan an agenda out because these people don't have like free time to just drop in their office, right? Especially now with remote work too, you've got to be very intentional about having that cadence. And again, that's, as a consultant, I'd say about 50% of my work is setting up meetings, but they're important meetings to help drive the agenda forward.
Ted, how do you invest your cupcakes?
Yeah, so in addition to those things, I think a big piece is consistency. So, consistently show up as both as a leader and then, kind of representing your department. And I think one of the other things that's really worked well for me is so it's easy to show value in information security when something goes wrong, right? Hopefully things aren't going wrong, so you don't have to then show up as a hero and say, I saved the day, I kept this from being, a $5 million exposure. Like we did all this work to reduce that. And so since you don't actually want to end up there, you don't want to end up having to be the hero, you should be designing a program that's preventing those things from happening. But if you're preventing the things from happening, then they don't see that. There's no visibility into the fact that you've protected them. And so spend some time when you're then going out and talking with your peers in the organization on the business side, and be able to tell the story, because your people should be doing the work that actually prevented things from happening. Go and talk to them about it, right? And say, hey, like we actually dodged it. Log4j, we actually dodged a bullet on that, right? We had some exposed systems. And here's what the team did, and your operations that were able to continue. So it's a good story to tell. But you have to take the time to go out and tell that story, otherwise they're never going to know. They're never going to see it otherwise.
And you got to tell it in a way that they'll understand it.
Yeah.
Right? So we all have metrics. Metrics are useless, by the way, unless you have key performance indicators, which are metrics along with goals. And metrics along with goals that will explain to your counterparts within the business the value you bring. And so if you don't have key performance indicators that any one of the executive teams can understand, then you need to find some key performance indicators that you can find out, that you can say, and look at the Wall Street Journal, find the headlines on security issues. Those are some of your KPIs. You prevented these things. But it took you this to do that. And you don't, in the end of the day, if one of your KPIs is you were able to deal with an intrusion within so many minutes, hours, days, whatever, you got to champion that too. You have to bring yourself up to a level where they're seeing. Most of what we do, we think, oh, just another day, we stopped another intrusion. But if you ask the profit center leaders in my company, they can tell you when we stopped ransomware. It didn't affect anybody, but that is a key performance indicator that goes out. We had this occur. It took us this long. This is what would have happened if we would have missed it. So they all know $4.24 million is the average cost of a ransomware breach. Now there's something they're thinking about, right? So we do marketing.
Yeah, a good test of that is if your metrics versus KPIs, if the number you're describing, you have to spend 5 minutes explaining the context, well, we do this number of threat hunts because they're important to find the vulnerability, you're already behind, right? Yeah. Your KPI needs to almost be self-explanatory. It's your elevator pitch. Yep. We avoided $5 million of loss. We do that every month. That's the kind of thing that will resonate.
So you talked about making the case to champions you need. Okay, you get the funding. Then what?
You have to execute.
Spend it wisely.
All right, we'll wrap up here. Data rationalization, spend it wisely.
Yeah, spend it, yeah.
But here's the thing, you're not going to get it right. There's no such thing as a perfect, in the data world, every model is wrong, some models are useful, right? So you build a budget, you build a plan, you're going to make mistakes, but the way you message those mistakes, the way you adapt and respond, and the way you hopefully plan for some things to take longer than expected, for some things to have a budget overrun, you have to be very careful that you don't, take not enough budget and then come back and come back and come back. On the other hand, you don't know all the details going in, and we live in a dynamic world. So, a good project management discipline, a good stakeholder communication plan, all the best practices for any kind of a project program, they're critical to making sure you keep getting those investments.
Celebrate the small wins. Plan for them when you're implementing your program.
What would be an example?
Well, if you're you're going to find why this guy is such a good salesperson, find it and tell them about it. Find small things that you can quickly show value along the way, so that when you get to the hard stuff, if it is harder and it takes you longer, but you've proven value at the beginning. And communicate. It's all about communication. If you just take the $1 million and run, you're not going to get the next billion. Communicate. Let them know what's going on. Short elevator pitches. It's the best way to do it.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, so it's not like when you've got a project team and they're kind of mapping out all of the work that they're going to do, and they build milestones in, and you can tie those small victories to the milestones that they're going to do, or depending on your approach in your company, whether you're using Agile, and so there's user story completion or whatever else. But it's not good enough to, for example, say, we met this minimum viable product, that the dashboard's online. That's not interesting to anyone. That's interesting to me or the project team because we accomplished something. But turning to so as a leader, then you got to figure out, we used the dashboard to go accomplish X.
Yep.
Like he was talking about, like we used the dashboard to go find the top sales guy, and we were able to, I don't know whatever, push that out into the business, and they were able to use some of his techniques and train the next guy up, and we saw that in the next month on the dashboard. Okay, so now we've got our project milestone, but there's actual business benefit, and that's the thing that then is really interesting when you're celebrating the small wins. That being said, I do think that there's two levels of celebrating success. One is with the project team, you got the dashboard online, yeah, let's celebrate that. But I'm going to do that internally on the team.
Yep.
That next win, which is we use the dashboard to do something interesting for the business, which in a lot of cases, you want to communicate to the project team, but I found that the tech guys really like, ooh, cool.
Yeah.
We knew that was going to happen because our dashboard's so cool, but that's the piece that the business cares about. So now you're having a separate celebration with your peers, right?
We got time to take some questions here. It's Alexis time. If you have a question, get a hand up there. Alexis will bring the microphone to you. Love to get you engaged in this conversation. Data rationalization, the hottest topic. Come on. Get a hand up. Alexis will come right to you.
It's a pain.
Meanwhile, gentlemen, what are the privacy questions that really need to be front and center now when you're talking about rationalizing the data spend? That's a big one.
Yeah.
Which state?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's
which
the
country?
challenge. So people are getting more and more attuned to the fact that, one, they have private data. It's probably not good to sell it for a candy bar. And there's value in the data that they own. Mm-hmm. And so now they want more control over that data. The challenge now becomes, in most of our applications that have been built in the last 20 years, there's no concept of deleting specific data about a consumer. But in multiple states now, you have to. There's this, and if you're in GDPR, same thing. You have to forget about me, or you have to give me your data so I can give it to somebody else. I now have control over my data. That means if I have a big data lake and I think I've de-identified it, did you? And how can you respond to this? I want to know everything you've collected about me, where did that data come from, and I want you to get rid of it all. And depending on the state, that's a requirement. How many people have thought about that in their data lakes and in their normal applications where they collect consumer data? That's the toughest thing. You're only safe if you have another regulation that says, oh, sorry, I can't forget about you. We're 3 years into a 7-year in California on that. So I've got four more years to figure out how to answer that question and getting rid of that data, because we no longer can have the answer, oh, I have a competing regulation. So that's really the things that people haven't thought about, is all of the privacy implications about the consumer having control of their data, which is why you need to know where it came from.
And the derivatives of that data, there's different rules and privacy regulations. And there's not just privacy too, there's contractual, right? If you purchase data, if you acquire it somehow, what happens to insights that are produced with that data? Who owns them? How do you protect them? You have to have, again, back to the dictionary lineage, you have to have a strong governance program of this data that has to stay evergreen in order to even have a hope at answering those questions.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'd say in addition to those, then the only other question I'd ask is, do the people whose data you own know that you've got it? Because when this actually came up in the privacy talk earlier, I think it was great. Hopefully you've got a good privacy partner to work with, but any data that you own that identifies a customer, it's kind of a, if you will, a contract between you and that customer. They should know that you've got that data and how you're using it. And if so, if the business that the business unit that you're working with can't tell you why they're using all of those data elements, and that they've communicated to the customer that they're using all those data elements in a certain way, then I think you've got a big privacy problem.
Very good. And we have a question just in at the buzzer here, right over here, please.
So I have a question around, it's kind of the business value realization, what you're talking about being able to take a technology solution and then show internally what the, if you'd be able to decrease downtime, increase efficiency, those different pieces. One of the biggest things I've kind of run into is getting people on board and kind of understanding that and getting the different business units to work together peacefully and also provide the information. And sometimes, I'll throw ideas out to them. I'm like, do you have this type of data or this type of data? And everyone's different. So how have you guys had success with that, of being able to identify the different pieces of data that are going to be important in different businesses and getting people willing to provide that?
So I think it's a couple thoughts. Like from a understanding the data that you're trying to build the case with, right? What is the cost of downtime, right? What's not happening? What revenue is not being generated by a system being down? Or what is the number of people times hours it takes to solve a problem? So there are metrics like that you can think of. But then to solve the other piece, you actually have to go up. Right, you have to find an executive sponsor who's going to unlock some of those roadblocks, and that's the person you need to sell on the vision and help to articulate this is why it's important. And if you've got the right sponsor, they can help to then pull the other teams in.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with corporate culture. So the organization I'm in right now has a great corporate culture. We all work together, and it's really a fun place to work. I used to work at a place where each of the different business units were basically a loose confederation of warring tribes. They wouldn't sit in the same room and talk about anything, afraid that their competitor within the business was going to steal their idea. And so those are really, really hard to deal with. And at that point, you have to get as high up in the organization as you can to get a champion who understands what the value is, to basically come down and beat them about the head and shoulders until they play nice. So it really is a lot about corporate culture and how do you do that and get them to work together and then find the right champions at the right place to help you with that.
Mm-hmm. Well, gentlemen, I know we have another question, but we went into overtime here, and I need to give this up now because Anna Delaney needs to take the stage for our next session. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. Ted, Bruce, Randy, really appreciate it. Terrific discussion on data rationalization. Thank you.